So thanks to the fact that a number of different celebrities and really wealthy businessmen and all that decided to bribe their kids into the top flight universities, we're talking about education as a country and some of the inequalities that give us the results that we have in public education. That's a great thing. That's awesome. But the issue isn't just that some people who used to be on Full House are bribing their kids into Yale or USC or whatever. There are so many related issues that I really hope that we don't just cover this story, talk about the story for a week, and then we all move on. That would be like if we found out that, hey, black lung's coming back. Maybe our energy system is messed up. Let's just talk about black lung and then ignore it. In the same way that the Green New Deal understands that these are interconnected systems, that the inequalities are more foundational than just an any one issue, the same thing exists in education. So some people handing over $400,000 and getting fake soccer pictures or something, that's an issue. It needs to be dealt with. I don't know that people need to be dragged out of their homes with guns, but it's an issue, I understand that. But around it are some other big issues, and thankfully I am seeing some conversation about that I hope is maintained. So Andy Zeiler on Twitter tweeted, "Perhaps this is a good time to talk about all the perfectly legal ways the wealthy are both allowed and expected to manipulate college admission systems while teaching their children to disparage affirmative action." That is totally true. I mean, people have talked about the fact that, like, Kushner's dad handed over 5 or 6 times as much money as any of these Full House or whatever celebrities did, and it was 100% legal. It was even more obviously a bribe, but we just expect that it's totally cool, not a big deal. If you name a dining hall after some venture capitalist, yeah, his kid gets to go to the college, obviously. Does that make any real sense? It's just one of those things that we accept and don't often question, but we should, and this is an opportunity. This is a window where we can possibly do that. Sort of related, AOC, who's obviously very focused on the influence of money in politics, having just run a very successful grassroots-funded campaign, said, "I guess college admissions isn't that different from elections where lots of money can buy your spot too. Also, an environment where those who make it despite the odds are suspected to have not earned it, not truly belong, or assumed to not be able to perform at the same level." And of course, thankfully, in terms of education, I think people get that weird double standard exists where people who get in through legacy or through the huge amounts of resources that their family have, they're just expected that, yeah, this is part of an ongoing multi-generational dynasty at this university, totally cool, nothing to see here. But if you're poor, maybe you got in because of some demographic variable or something like that. Even though in many of these cases, obviously, they had a better call to actually be there, a better right to actually be there. And yeah, so that's something that needs to be dealt with. Now understand too that you have the bribing, you have the paying for the buildings and all that, the huge donations, but even for the people, the parents who don't go through that process, that doesn't mean that there's not massive financial inequality that's resulting in some kids going to college, particular colleges, high-priced colleges, and some not. And this is, I understand, an area where we're not talking about anything illegal being done. If you're raised in a way that you have the money, your family has the money to send you to, a really expensive prep school or give you violin lessons or do SAT prep courses and things like that, that is totally legal. If you have the access to it, of course you're going to take it. I don't begrudge anyone the ability to be seemingly a better fit with a college. But not everyone has that, obviously. Look, there are people whose families had a lot less resources than I did, but I didn't have anything like that. Part of the reason is my family never went to college. Between my 2 parents, there was 1 semester of college, and we didn't have any money to do any of those crazy extracurriculars or anything like that. I didn't even have great grades. Thankfully, I did okay on the SATs. No one has been able to explain how exactly that worked in practice, but thankfully that was enough to get me into a public university like UConn. But think about all the people who can't fall back on family, legacy connections to universities, that their family's name isn't on a library or anything like that. And on top of it, they can't have these sorts of extremely expensive prep systems to get them into universities. And the thing is, honestly, it's worse now than it was even when I was trying to get into college. Because while standardized tests were certainly a thing, they seem to be a far bigger influence over who ends up in even state-level public universities than they were when I was trying to go to college. And we need to deal with that. Like, yes, if Lori Loughlin goes to jail, some people are going to say, hey, we dealt with the inequalities in our education system. But that is such a tiny portion of a far larger problem that we need to deal with. One more thing, we don't have time to get into it too in depth, but obviously the inequality isn't just before you get into college. We know that some people are going to leave college, it was paid off for them, they get to go off, get their job, they're not burdened by debt, they get to fully, be a part of the economy, but many people don't, and they are burdened with literally a lifetime of debt. Now, how much would it cost to actually replace all of that? It's a lot of money. It's $1.5 trillion right now. And to give you an idea of how bad the problem is, it was $1 trillion like less than 5 years ago. So maybe this is something we should deal with before it gets even worse. But bear in mind, as AOC did, that's far less than we just gave away to the wealthiest individuals and corporations with the GOP tax bill of last year. In fact, that was $1.8 to $2.3 trillion, which would have comfortably paid for eliminating all student loan debt. And we would have had money left over for, I don't know, maybe we get healthcare or something. And the cool thing is about that is we give that money to the wealthy, we give it to the corporations or whatever, then they sit on it. They park it in an island chain you've never heard of. It doesn't actually do anything. It's not productive for the US economy. But imagine, for all of the people that are currently burdened with student loan debt, I've seen some numbers that show that if we were to cancel it, which I get is a radical idea, 25 million American millennials, on average, would suddenly find that there's $30,000 less dollars in debt that they need to deal with. And here's the thing. Of all of the millennials that I have met in my life, very few have accounts in the Virgin Islands. And so if they suddenly had 30,000 effective dollars more of spending power, it would not end up in some bank account. It would end up going out into the economy. GOP loves to talk about how tax cuts stimulate the economy, despite the fact that there's very little evidence for that. But this sort of stimulus would have an immediate and enduring influence on the US economy that we would reap the benefits for years, if not decades. It would be massive, not just for those 25 million American millennials, but for the economy at large. These are the sorts of larger conversations that we need to have, that we are lucky enough that conversation is being started thanks to some celebrities breaking the law to benefit their kids. Now, I care about that, but I care about the structural stuff far more. Okay, let's just really fast. Meghan McCain on The View, legacy admissions are in the conversation lately. She doesn't like that. Here's how she addressed the topic.
Legacy admissions, which means if your parents went to Brown or Harvard or UP, you can go. But it's interesting because the idea of legacy admissions is racist in nature, and I'll tell you why. It started in the 20s to keep out upwardly mobile immigrants who had started pushing for admission to elite schools. Yeah. And I think that is a very, very bad system. Legacy. Why should your kid get in because you got in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the only thing I will say is
not
when
fair.
it comes to
I didn't have any. I was the first person in my whole family to go to college.
In military academies, my family goes back generations at the Naval Academy, and that's service to your country. So I would push back in that part of it because my grandfather, great grandfather, my brothers, they all served their country.
Yeah, but if you don't have the grades, why should you benefit from that?
They did have the grades. My brother did, but I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of the fact that my family's legacy is at the Naval Academy. My father's buried there.
I'm not talking about your family. I'm talking about
legacy.
I'm talking about the policy of where legacy admissions came from.
I'm very proud of my family's legacy at the Naval Academy.
And Jews probably out of the colleges.
Well, let me say
that's what it's about.
Projection is an ugly thing. They're not talking about her. They're not talking about her family. But she is very defensive about nepotism. In terms of education, in terms of career, and I understand that. If I had a gigantic weakness, I'd probably be really aware of it. But thankfully, at least for the audience of The View, thanks to Joy Behar, they understand some of the historical context that led to the current legacy system. It doesn't get talked about, but there are gigantic racial and religious components to it as well.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.